Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Devon DeGilio. So excited to be kicking off the second episode of Mind Meets Body and Soul. And I'm here with my co-host.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Raffanello. I am so excited to be here. I hope that you're all doing well. Devon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be recording our second episode. I feel like, as you know, we've had a little bit of difficulty where we've just experienced some challenges in putting this podcast together. It's definitely been an experience, but one that I just want to say right off the bat, I'm really grateful to have you doing it here with me.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I've said this at the beginning, but I wouldn't be here doing this if it weren't for you here with me. So that's always the silver lining.
Yes, it's been a fun adventure. And we talked about centering this episode around the mind, body, and soul connection, which is what we are really here to do. So in this second episode, as we talk about the mind, body, soul connection, I thought what better way than to reflect on this experience that we shared just last week. Heather and I had a photo shoot as we were preparing for the promotional content for this podcast.
Yeah, we were doing, which was already a nerve-wracking thing for me. I prefer to be on the receiving, this side of the couch where people are talking to me behind the camera, not in front of it. So in and of itself, I was nervous for that. Plus all the hurdles that we had to jump over just to get there.
We did jump over a lot of hurdles, but the reason why I wanted to reflect on this, one, I think it was just such a great experience to share with you, but two, I think it does give great leeway to the conversation of the mind, body, soul connection, especially having you, leaning more on the mind aspect of things and me with the body and soul. I think we just feed off of one another really well. Whether you and I had been discussing getting together for a photo shoot so that we could create this promotional content for the podcast. And I had a photographer in mind. He's my go-to photographer for all of my business needs. And I reached out to him. He was totally down. And we had been discussing different venues or different spaces that we would be able to shoot in. And he had a great spot in mind. He had found it on Peerspace, and he had said that he's wanting to use this space. And I shared it with you, and both of us were like, yes, the aesthetics of this place were beautiful. It was such a match for what we saw for the cover photo for the podcast. And then just in general, too, there were different elements of that space that we would then be able to use for our own individual businesses. So right away, this was 2 weeks before the photo shoot was supposed to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks before
Probably
the photo
about
shoot.
2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, about 2 weeks. I put in the request for this space. The host had listed it as a 3-hour minimum, but Freddie, our photographer, and I were like, maybe we can just see if he would allow us to put in for 2 hours instead. And this host had 48 hours to respond. And so in those 48 hours that you and I are waiting, we're getting a little nervous. We haven't heard from him. And then at that 48th hour, I just receive a rejection notice. The host has rejected your reservation request. And the explanation, other. which was so frustrating for both you and me, and also Freddie. We were like, what the heck? How unprofessional? Like, what does this mean? So I reached out to him and I asked for clarification. Does this mean that you're rejecting the 2-hour reservation window? Does this mean that the space is not available? And in the meantime, we had you, Heather, request the space then for the 3 hours on a different day too. And we were like, okay, maybe it was just a matter of the 3 hours. Maybe it was a matter of the day. So we'll switch. We'll give him the hours that he's, asking for, and we'll do it on a different day and see if that makes a difference. Meanwhile, he never responds to me. And then your experience, Heather, with this host was?
I had reached out from a separate account. I created my own Peerspace username for my business, sent a similar very kind message. We're so excited. We love your space. Also, mind you, in that 48 hours we were waiting for him to respond to your request, I was over here falling in love with the space, envisioning myself in this chair. I figured we'd be sitting on this couch for the podcast cover. So I totally fell in love with that space. The colors, the aesthetic, all of it felt perfect. So I submitted my request, waiting 48 hours, every 12 hours. I was checking my emails, trying to see if he got back to us. Then I submitted my request on a Sunday. So I actually also remember I got a little confused by, you have 48 business hours. So then 48 hours went by and I was like, okay, good. 48 hours is good. It's coming up. He should be responding soon. And then you were like, no, it's 48 business hours.
So frustrating.
Oh my gosh. So he never responded. The 48 hours expired and I never heard anything.
And now by this point, this was Tuesday, Wednesday of the week. And we had this photo shoot planned for Sunday with no space, no venue to shoot at. And same exact thing with you, Heather. We had this visual of the place, of the space, and it was seemingly perfect for us. And the fact that it wasn't working out, it wasn't just falling into place with us, was extremely frustrating. And I could tell that both of us, and I'll speak for myself, but I could tell that I was becoming a little bit anxious and a little worried, oh no. We were doing our due process, requesting this space further out in advance. We had started this process 2 weeks out, allowing for a safe amount of time for this host to get back to us, never got back to either one of us. So then we're at the point midweek, what do we do? I know that you and I were both vigorously searching through event spaces and not able to find anything in the area, anything in the price range. And so here is where you and I differ in our approaches to things, or at least in this moment, in this stressful moment, because I had been searching and it got to a point where I was just getting really frustrated. And you were frustrated as well as soon as the reservation expired and there was no response from this host. And your question was, well, do I try it again? And at this point, I'm like, I don't, there's too much resistance here. I need to step away from this. I'm going to take some time and space. I'm going to meditate, set the intention that whatever is meant for us will come with ease and effortlessly. And I think you laughed at that, because what was your response? You can share that with the group. You can share that with the audience.
I laughed at that, and I literally texted you the gif of the Kool-Aid man, pushing, running through the wall, because you're I'm going to meditate. I'm going to let's just take a step back. Let's take a beat and see what happens. And I'm I'm going to follow up with him. I'm going to call him. I'm going to find him. I'm going to get this listing. I'm forceful.
Yes, I responded to you in that moment that my go-to move is flow over force. And so in the meantime, I took that time and space away, and we'll get into why that was so helpful for me. In the meantime, thinking outside of the box, moving away from the Peerspace platform that we had been looking at, and you took a totally different route, and you shifted gears and you started looking at different coffee shops, right?
Well, I also reconfigured my apartment and I was like, we could take shots at my apartment. Then I started Googling like cute coffee shops in New Jersey.
Yes.
And I was doing all of the research. By the time you and I reconnected, you were like, let's give it like a day or, overnight. And overnight, I don't know what you were doing in your flow over force, but I was vigorously typing away on my laptop, trying to find all the spaces. I was like, I can move my office couch into the living room. We have an exposed brick wall. So I had 10 plans in my head of like what we could do to make sure that this worked.
Yeah. So we both redirected from where we were. We just did it in different ways.
Yeah. Mine, I think what this is reminding me of is like fight or flight. And I think in this moment, my response was to fight. Like, we have this deadline. We want to launch this podcast on a certain day. Like, all of these things have to happen by a certain point. So like, I'm going to make sure that I get this done. I go into this like fix it mode when I'm stressed, and I just problem solve and find resolution or create resolution the best that I can.
That makes sense. And before we get to the rest of this story, because it gets better, I think that's perfect leeway to what we're talking about in this episode as like the mind, body, and soul connection. Because something that you said just really stuck out. You mentioned that in those moments of stress, of fight or flight, your go-to method is re-strategizing, reconfiguring. And that's exactly what you did. We were stalking this Peerspace website, like going through every single post that we could. And we both realized that that wasn't conducive for either one of us. So whereas my strategy was to just walk away from it all and take a breath and come back to it later, your strategy was, okay, let me step away from the Peerspace, but let me re-strategize. Let me shift my mind or shift gears to something else and find a different like loophole or find a different mend. And is that something that you often recommend when working with your clients in therapy?
Something I say to my clients that I didn't do here, maybe I did a little bit, but I always say to my clients, zoom out. Like, imagine that you're looking at a mural. And in that moment, I was so zoomed in that I was only looking at this tiny piece. And you can't really appreciate or understand the entire big picture if your like head is all the way up at the mural looking at like, a little tiny square. So I guess in a way I kind of zoomed out and picked a new strategy or a new path. Okay, Peerspace is not working. Let me back up and take a different route by reconfiguring my apartment or by finding all the cute coffee shops in New Jersey. So I think what I would recommend to my clients is more on the line of what you did. Pause, take a breath, zoom out, and then decide. Once you're looking at the whole big picture, then you can make a more like educated decision or make a different decision based on like what might be best for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I will give you full credit that you did reach out to these coffee shops, which were so cute. They had amazing aesthetics. And what we experienced in response, like you emailed those coffee shops, and I noticed that like many of them emailed you right back and responded, we would be so happy to have you in this space. And they were so accommodating too. They were like, it's best if you come at this hour or this hour because we won't be as busy. Or if you want to rent out our space for an hour or so, it would be X amount of money. So right then and there was that different experience of resistance. And when it's time to walk away, when it's time to be like, no, this isn't how it should be. This is like continually walking into a wall and expecting the wall to just, disappear. And as opposed to opening the door and just being able to walk right through the passageway. And that's what those coffee shops offered for us. They were like, yeah, come on in. We would love to have you. We'll accommodate you however fits your needs. And so I give you a lot of credit because at the time that we reconnected in the morning, I didn't have a plan. You had a plan. And
the
you
plan,
had options for us.
And the plan, we didn't even end up going with that plan. We ended up doing something entirely different, and we'll get to that. But the plan helped me feel safe. It helped me sleep, to know that like at least I've created this net underneath of us, that worst case scenario, I drag this couch from my office into the living room and we take our pictures there. Best case scenario, we use one, or middle case scenario, whatever, we use one of these really cute coffee shops. But at least I can like sleep and like quiet my mind in knowing that there's something there to catch us.
For sure. Yes. And I love that you followed, I mean, of course, you're the clinical therapist here. You followed what worked for you best. Whereas my take on things, and this is where we come in, or this is where I come in with more the energetics, the spiritual connection between things, is that I've learned in my practice, and I've learned in my own self-healing journey, especially thank you to my original Reiki healer. She used to always tell me that when we face resistance for anything, it's an invitation for us to take a breath, take a step back, and reevaluate. Is this worth pursuing more, or am I being redirected? And something that I live by these days is that rejection is redirection. Hard to keep in mind in the moment, because in the moment when it came to that host on Peerspace, I had requested the space, he rejected me. Then I had you request the space, and he didn't get back to us. So by that point, after 2 rejections, there was no way that I was going to continue pushing this, continue walking into that wall, expecting that wall to move. And so for me, what makes me feel safe in the moment is tapping into my body, because in the moment of frustration, like you said, that stress response, that fight or flight, my go-to response is also fight. I want to figure things out in the here and now. I want to have this conversation right now. We're not leaving this space, this room, whatever, until we have things solved. And what I find is that rarely ever works for me, because I don't have a clear mind, and I'm letting my emotions get the best of me. So as we were continuing to search on Peerspace, I was just angry, honestly, and also feeling this sense of desperation. So in those moments, I know to listen to my body, that bodily response that I get of like the anger, the frustration, the stress just stirring in my body. And the body and mind connection there is that if your body is in this stressful state, your mind is not clear. So for me, the best thing to do was to walk away. I think I was going out to eat with friends anyway, so it was nice to have a little bit of a distraction. But then when I came home later, and especially the next day, I meditated. And that's where, for me, the body and the soul piece comes in, because in meditation, I'm with myself in silence, clearing my mind, tapping into my body. And then the soul piece of that too is leaning into this inherent sense of trust that everything always works out exactly as it's meant to. And it was really hard in the moment when we were facing that rejection from that host and we just couldn't find a spot, for you and me to really believe that things will work out. So Tuesday evening, then into Wednesday morning, this photo shoot's on Sunday, we have no spot. Of course we had the coffee shop as a great backup, but we didn't have our primary spot where we would be able to get the perfect podcast cover photo. So in those moments, again, it's a really helpful tool for me, and I teach this to my clients too, for taking that step back, for coming back to yourself, for sitting with yourself in silence. And by silence, I mean silencing the inner noise, the part of your mind that's like, oh my gosh, we have this photo shoot in X amount of days. We're not fully prepared. It's all going to fall apart. Now we're going to have to delay the launch of the podcast. So when you can tap into your silence, when you can tap into your body and allow yourself to be more open. It's kind of as you talked about, like when you're looking at the mural, like you're so focused, like you're so zeroed in, you have like that tunnel vision. When you drop into, or when I drop into meditation, it's like that tunnel vision, just my perspective of the world of things just expands. And I'm able to see, think, feel more clearly. And with that in meditation too, I set the intention that whatever is meant for us comes to us with flow and ease. And I know that sounds so much easier said than done. But then what happened is that I think I came to you that next morning, we connected, and you shared the coffee shop options that we had, right? And we picked out one specifically that we really liked. And then did I mention that I was going to continue looking just in case?
So it definitely was Wednesday, because also the other thing is that I have like days full of back-to-back clients. So the other stressor that I felt was like, I don't have the time to sit and like look through finding all these new spaces. I have a full-time job where I'm like working and seeing all these clients. So I was feeling that stress. So that's why I found all these coffee shops and I did all my research that night. You came back the next morning. We looked at a few of the coffee shops and chose which ones we thought were the right aesthetic. And then you were going to continue looking on Peerspace, or kind of just like, we would just touch base throughout the day.
Yes, which I did after I meditated, clear my head and, soothe my body, and came to this place of inner trust that it would just ease. I go back onto Peerspace. I brought in my horizon or parameters. I'm no longer looking just in New Jersey, where, the area where this other space was. And I come across this one space that has a lot of natural light, has the aesthetics, has some, furniture that we would be able to use in the podcast. The drawback was that it was in Queens. So for me, that would have meant a pretty good hike. And same available. I think it was also instant book, which meant that we didn't have to request and wait to hear back from the host. So he was up for it. He thought it was a great space. And then I got your response, Heather. And it was...
I remember opening the text and I was like, oh, look, this place is nice. I was looking through the pictures, but then I saw that it was in Queens, New York, and my heart dropped. I was like, oh my gosh, the last thing I want to do on a Sunday is drive, because even from Jersey City, it's a hike. I can only imagine from you. So I was like, the last thing I really want to do is drive to Queens on a Sunday. But also the second to last thing that I want to do is disappoint Devon and not like be the key piece that stops this from all happening and interrupts all of this. So I was having this like internal conflict of like, say the thing and disappoint her, or just like suck it up and go. And I don't remember exactly what I thought, but I thought to myself, like, this heart drop is some sort of resistance or like a sign. Like Devon would think my initial reaction of not wanting to go is a sign. So let me just say the thing. So I was like, this isn't my favorite thing to say, or however I said it, but I just let you know that I would be willing to do it if we had to do it, but it wasn't my favorite choice.
And I love that you honored that feeling, which is the body, because the body knows your truth. So any moment that you feel that like heart drop or that stomach clench up, or, the butterflies in your stomach or whatever it is, like that is your first reaction. And that is your truth for what you are feeling or experiencing. But then we like to use our mind to override what our body is telling us. So I give you credit for listening to your body. Then, of course, you have your own tools and strategies for communicating and speaking your wants and needs, right?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I say to my clients, which you were speaking to your side of this earlier, is that we have our logical mind and we have our emotional mind. And I think what happens is there's a situation or something triggers us, and think about your brain almost as like two sides. We get stuck on our emotional mind, and that drawbridge goes up, stranding us over there. So
Right.
in that moment, or in any emotional moment, we don't want to react based on that emotional space. We just need to do something, breathe, take a step back, pause, enough for that drawbridge to start going back down. So our logical mind can come over and say, okay, we hear you. We understand all of the emotional things. And here's the logical side as well. So in that moment, I felt the heart drop. I had the emotional thought. And I waited a second, and I just waited a second enough for that drawbridge to start to come back down and to feel more balanced.
That was just described in such a beautifully visual way. I love that. I've never thought of it like that before, because similarly I always bring up that element of nervous system regulation, right? That first experience being our body stress response experience, that emotional reaction that you're speaking to, the emotional mind. And I see the emotional mind as being the body. So in those moments, your body is having this reaction and your logical mind is not in coherence with your body, because your body, that emotional brain, starts to take over. So that's why in those moments, you're not able to rationalize what you're feeling. You're not able to communicate. As you mentioned, taking that beat, or earlier when we were looking for venues and you redirected yourself to like the coffee shops, for example, or for me, taking that beat, stepping away, meditating, setting an intention, that is that nervous system regulation that then allows us to logically comprehend what it is that we're experiencing. So that was a perfect example, I feel like, of how, you did that in that moment, and then coming to me with the communication of, I could do this. I would be willing to make the drive, but I'm not crazy about the idea.
Yeah. So let's get to the good stuff.
The good stuff, yes. So I continue to look because, yes, there was something about that space that wasn't a full F yes for me too. And we both wanted that full send, like that full yes. And we weren't feeling that with this space. We really weren't even feeling that with like even the coffee shops that you had found, or the idea of being in your apartment. Like they were all great, they were great options, but it wasn't that same yes that we felt originally when we came across that first venue that wasn't going to work out. So I took to Peerspace again and ended up coming across this brand new space. I think they had just posted it that day. There were no reviews, but the pictures were lovely. They had the aesthetics, they had the lights, they had the like furniture that fit the vision. And I sent that space to both you and to Freddie. Freddie got to me first, and he was like, I love that space. If we can book that, let's do it. It's actually so much more dynamic than the original spot. And I agreed with him. There were different rooms, there were different setups. So we would be able to get our podcast shoot as well as our own individual shoots as well. In the meantime, while I was waiting for your response, I also came across another space that also I'd actually bookmarked this space before. And it was very aesthetically pleasing, great natural light. It seemed very cozy and cute. The only drawbacks were, one, the host for some reason didn't receive the best reviews. And then two, the space wouldn't have been available for the exact time slot that we wanted. We would have had to either push our timing back or start earlier than we had hoped for. But was it the first one that called to you a little bit more than the second? Or was it me that mentioned that?
I was really trying to channel you in this process, because I was like, well, let's think about this. this one is brand new and doesn't have any reviews, but it's available during the time that we want. It seems like it fits the aesthetic that we're looking for. So there's doors that are open. Whereas the other one, we would have had to kind of wiggle our way to make it work, and it just felt a little more forceful. So that's really actually why I leaned into the one that we actually went with as my preference.
Yes, you did. And similarly too, I was like, okay, I'm getting a feeling that knowing, tapping into like, you know, that soul compass or that soul truth that I call it is like, okay, I'm feeling called to that first space. And so it was great. Freddie, you and I all agreed on this space. You reached out to the host and we set the intention. If this is the space for us, then it's ours. And what happened?
It was ours. It worked out.
The host got back to you within like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very quickly.
We love that quick of a response. Like 48 hours, please. And so this host got back to us. We booked the spot. We were also able to book it for the 2 hours, the 2-hour duration that we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah,
exact time that we wanted, exact duration that we wanted. The space was beautiful. And as Freddie mentioned, it was even more dynamic than the original space that we saw. Location was perfect because it was in Jersey City, where you currently are. And we also had this coffee shop in Jersey City as a backup. Mm-hmm. So by Wednesday afternoon, we were set. We could finally breathe and really get excited about being in this space because it was great. We had then Thursday, Friday, Saturday to start just envisioning ourselves in this space and what we wanted for our podcast photo shoot, for our own individual photo shoot. And so then comes Sunday and we show up. The host, Ashley, was absolutely lovely. She let us into this space and we were amazed, right? It beat our expectations. It was so much even better than what we had seen in the pictures.
It was so much better. And when she opened the door, we were like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. And I think something that's really fun about the space is because it's like you said, it's literally a brand new space. She had listed it that day on Peerspace. We were the first people to rent that space. So it was like clean energy. We were the first, but she only had a few photos. And I think the fun thing is when we got there and we started shooting and taking our photos, where we ended up taking our cover wasn't even on the initial Peerspace. Like there wasn't a photo of the space that we used. She had just added that after taking all the photos of the space. So it was even more meant for us because we didn't even see the spot where our cover photo was taken. And we just like let our intuition guide us to our literal cover photo.
And it felt so good. Mind, body, and soul in alignment, in coherence with one another. It all flowed so perfectly. Yes, I love that you mentioned the part of the space that wasn't even shown in photos. And lo and behold, it became our podcast cover photo. And beyond that too, was the host herself. Ashley was so wonderful. She was so communicative with us. She was so accommodating. And we had a great photo shoot.
Yeah, it was definitely very serendipitous. It was a great photo shoot. The energy in the space was amazing. It all worked out.
It did all work out.
And it all worked out beautifully.
Yeah, it all worked out better than we could have even expected. And I love that this is happening at the very beginning of your and my podcast journey together, because I'm getting to learn like the tools and strategies that work for you, that you use with your clients. And then you're also getting to see the tools and strategies that I use, or the tools and strategies that I recommend with my clients. And when we put them all together, the mind, the body, and the soul components coming into coherence, it all just works out so beautifully. And so and with such ease and flow.
It just gave us the perfect second episode to this podcast, which is kind of like our first episode if you take out our introductions. So like this is such a fun way to share a real lived experience that we both shared from both of our perspectives to highlight the importance of like how we can live connected and balanced and calibrated with our mind, body, and soul.
And when we do, beautiful, magical things come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, Heather, is it time to wrap up our second episode?
I think it is. I just got the chills.
Oh, yay. I will say for any of you listening to our podcast who either have your own podcast or are thinking about it, this process is definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenging experience. But as we said in the beginning, I'm so glad that we have each other to go through this together.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree so much. So to end each episode, we'll be looking up at our vision boards to see what's calling out to us. So Devon, I think it's your turn this week to look up at your vision board and share with us what's calling to you.
Yes. The first thing that calls to me right away is 3 words: cultivate embodied gratitude, which is so aligned with, we started and ended this episode talking about how grateful we were to have one another in this experience, in this journey. And cultivating a gratitude practice is all about finding the moments, small and big, that you are grateful for, that you are appreciative of having. And with that, in placing your focus on all the things that you love in your life, all the things that you have, you just naturally realize how amazing, how beautiful your life really is, how full it is. And so embodying gratitude is such a high vibrational state to be in. So we'll leave you with that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the second episode of Mind Meets Body and Soul. We will see you next week.
We'll see you next week. We are so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.